What is going on? This is your host, Jay Stern, with my co-host, OG Beckham. What's up, buddy?
What's going on, Jay?
Not too much. Let's talk about what's going on and what's coming up in the UFC, starting it off with none other than the rumors. The rumor mill abound about Conor McGregor possibly fighting Tony Ferguson on the December 30th, essentially the New Year's Eve card. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's going to happen.
You don't think it's going to happen because McGregor's not going to get the kind of money he's looking for?
Yeah, exactly. I think Conor's going to tell Dana White, hey, Tony Ferguson's last pay-per-view sold 100,000 buys. My last pay-per-view at Nate Diaz sold over 1 million. I'm fighting Nate Diaz.
Right. I get
That's
it.
what I think's going to happen.
You think the UFC has too much of a credibility problem having him fight Nate Diaz? Almost like, guys, we just can't do this. Like, it's just like we're just losing fans by the boatload, and this is just going to make us lose even more fans.
No, I think that when you have Conor McGregor fight Floyd Mayweather when he has no professional boxing fights, any questions about credibility totally go out the window.
Yeah, but they got around that by having the fight outside of the UFC, so it wasn't a UFC fight, it was a boxing match. Now we're talking about having him fight Nate Diaz, who hasn't fought since the last time he fought McGregor, and hasn't done anything. I mean, honestly, other than his win over McGregor, I'd be hard pressed to think of the last time Nate Diaz beat anybody.
No, I don't think he's done anything in the last year other than smoke weed and drink tequila.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way Nate Diaz can pass a drug test. You gotta believe that there's no way USADA is showing up at Nate Diaz's trailer going, hey, we need a sample, bro.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I can't see Conor taking a Tony Ferguson fight. It's just not going to... After making hundreds of millions of dollars, why is he going to fight Tony Ferguson? Like, it does nothing for Conor McGregor.
Well, the money has to make sense. So, I mean, if we just do some basic math, if they're charging $60 a pay-per-view and, they get 1 million pay-per-views for that fight, then, that's 60 million gross that they have some money to pay McGregor. Now, the question is, how much money are they going to have to pay McGregor out of that? I don't know if you heard, the last fight that they did, the Ferguson fight, they were like, the pay-per-view gross, at 120 times this was $3 million. The problem was that the fighter payouts were like $2.5 million. So it was almost like a wash. I mean, at a certain level, if the UFC can't bring in those big numbers, they can't really make any money.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think Conor McGregor has him by the ball. So basically, whatever Conor wants, Conor's going to get, and they're going to have to do. So if he wants to fight Tony Ferguson, I can see the fight happening. But if he doesn't, it's not happening.
Who the fuck is this guy? That was
right.
My really bad Conor McGregor impression. Yeah, and then the other fight that they would have on the same card ideally would be Khabib versus Edson Barboza, with the understanding that the winner gets McGregor. Of course, me and you know that if GSP wins, they're going to do anything they can to make that fight happen.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever Conor wants, he gets. I don't know, man. I don't see why. If Nurmagomedov actually makes the fight, I don't see anybody beating him.
Can we just agree to call him Khabib, because there's no way we're going to keep pronouncing that properly?
I just totally butchered it. Yeah, we'll call him Khabib from now on.
Shish Khabib. So yeah, Khabib has his own problems making weight, and to me, Barboza probably. I mean, I don't. Barboza's a pretty sharp guy on his feet. Not like, but a guy who hasn't really shown much on the ground. So, I mean, if there's a guy for Khabib to toss around, that's probably a good matchup for Khabib.
Exactly. I agree 100%. I'd like to see Khabib fight Tony Ferguson.
Right. Well, Tony Ferguson, to me, I mean, Kevin Lee in that first round had him on the ground and was dropping some elbows and, was putting on him. And I was like, dude, where's your Eddie Bravo Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, man? That's all you've been talking about. He did finish him off, later on. But in that first round, he didn't look so sharp on his back, did he?
Not at all. And it wasn't until Lee got tired until he had an advantage on the ground. So I'd like to see how his ground game would go against his bottom game would be against Khabib's top game. I don't know. Be a good fight.
Well, one fight we will never see is McGregor-Khabib, 100%. You agree?
I agree that fight won't happen 100%, 100%.
All right, let's move on to the next order of discussion. Not completely unrelated, but we talked about Khabib not being able to make weight. And another guy just came out, Mark Goddard, one of the UFC refs, came out and agreed with me, like I agree with Dana White, on the one thing we agree on, which is that additional weight classes will not help the weight cutting problem. Your thoughts?
Well, as we talked off air, I'm an advocate of more weight classes. But I think if they do add more weight classes, they also need to add some other stipulations, like fighters, like we talked about before, they need to get fined if they don't make weight. They need to be within a certain weight on fight day as they were at weigh-ins. I know I read a little while ago, Drew Dober, he's a lightweight in UFC. On fight day, he was 185 pounds. And he fights at 155. That's just not healthy. Well, he should never be allowed to fight at 155.
Yeah, we talked about that last week with Kevin Lee. I said he's got to be at least 180, in the cage after making 155. So I think that's kind of like standard. What Mark Goddard, the UFC ref who chimed in on this, what he said was that, let's say we had like a 165 class. He said the guys who cut to 170, a lot of those guys are just going to try to cut an extra 5 to 165. It's not really going to be much of a difference. People are going to try to get the biggest advantage they can by cutting the most amount of weight. Unfortunately, just the way weight cutting is done, most of that comes down to last-minute weight cuts, which are unhealthy and dangerous.
Yeah, that's my biggest worry. Like, someone's going to die. So they need to do something. Because did you see that guy in Japan? Was it last week?
Yeah, it was.
He looked like he was on death's door.
Yeah, they had to carry him to weigh him in, and then carry him off afterwards, and then they allowed him to fight that night, no problem, really no questions asked. Hey, you feeling okay? Yeah, I mean, once they get the smelling salts and the Gatorade in him, he's just fine.
I don't think he was tapping out during the fight, but his kidneys were.
Right, and his IV bag. Once they get all those three things in his corner, he should be okay. They keep it under a towel, but all three of those things are the IV directly going into the Gatorade bottle.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it's just I think it's just a matter of time till someone dies. So, yeah. I think adding weight classes, like you said, a guy at the lighter weights, it might not help, but I think at the larger weights, it might give guys options, because sometimes you have smaller heavyweights. You might have a Cain Velasquez fighting at 235, 240 pounds against a Brock Lesnar who's fighting at 265. Well, maybe that guy could fight it.
I'm 100% in favor of that weight class. I definitely think there needs to be something between the 205 and the 265. I mean, that's ridiculous. So I definitely in favor of a weight class there, but we know these guys don't really cut weight anyway. At that point, at that level, we heard that Brock Lesnar had to lose some weight to make 265 or what have you. But for the most part, there should be, just because, like you said, it's not really fair to have a guy who's 210 pounds having to fight a guy who's 265. So I agree with the weight class in there. But for health purposes, I would point out that, boxing, you got weight class, 126, 130, 135, 140, 147, 154, 160. So all the weight classes are somewhere between 5 and 7 pounds apart. And in the last year, I believe we've had no less than 5 champions in those classes fail to make weight. So, to me, what that tells is it's a discipline problem, or it's guys not understanding their bodies. They get a little bit older, they pack on just some natural more mass, and they have trouble losing that base mass.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, you've brought this up before, that might fix it. I know what they did with Adrian Broner. His last fight, I believe he had to make 140, which he was having problems making. They were going to take half of his fight purse, and miraculously he made weight. So maybe you have to go into their pockets. That might be the only.
I agree. I mean, it's sad to kind of have it come to that. But the only other option, people are like, oh, have to have them weigh in and periodically weigh in a week before the fight and make sure that they're on weight. And all that's going to do is lead to even more cancellations. So I mean, if people now have to cut weight, what they're going to do is they're going to dry themselves out the night before their interim cut weight. And it's going to just become even more ridiculous because you know as well as I do, guys who do this, they can cut 20 pounds in 24 hours. So if they're above weight, you're going to basically be making them cut weight to make an interim weigh-in, when they're really the only thing that any fan cares about is whether the guy makes weight for the actual fight, if they care about that.
You're correct. So what's the fix? What do you think it is?
I mean, for now, the fix has got to just be, I think Dana White has the right idea in having more guys work with professional trainers to kind of keep them on target and not have, guys who, he said, guys who don't have a big budget or don't a lot of big budget for their training camp don't have the money to hire a professional to help them, but that's what a professional can do, is definitely keep them on target and make sure, that they only have, 10, 12 pounds to lose, to lose most of the water the night before the fight, and not guys trying to literally, drop 20 pounds, twice as much weight.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's hard, though, to hire a professional when you're making that $5,000 to show and $5,000 to win.
We talked about that on episode 363. If anybody wants to go back and find that episode, we talked a lot about the pay, but we'll get back to that in a future episode. Let's move on to the fight for this Saturday night in Poland. We have Donald Cerrone taking on Darren Till, and I'll tell you, they cut a pretty mean promo trying to hype the heck out of this fight, as if Darren Till is the next coming of Anderson Silva. Tell me, have you seen that promo?
I haven't seen it. I think Darren Till is best known for the guy who has a Paige Van Zandt tattoo in his arm, but that tattoo isn't of Paige Van Zandt.
I didn't know that. But I'll say this: I watched Darren Till's fights. Look, he's 3-0-1 in the UFC, and he's 15-0-1 overall. But I've watched a bunch of his fights. The guy. Technically, he's no Anderson Silva, except that he keeps his hands dangerously low. When he throws, he's a southpaw, which gives a lot of guys problems. But when he throws that left hand, literally, he drops his right hand all the way down to his waist. He's so open for counter punches, and the reality is, he hasn't beaten anybody whose name we can pronounce in the UFC. So, Cerrone has taken on all comers. He's fought everybody from the top down. And most importantly, what we know about Donald Cerrone is this. If the stakes are high, Donald Cerrone loses. If there's no stakes at all, Donald Cerrone wins.
I think Donald Cerrone wins this weekend because we've never heard of Darren Till.
Exactly. If it's not a top contender, if it's not a title eliminator or a championship fight, you can bet the house on Donald Cerrone.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying
Cerrone
chokes under pressure, but Donald Cerrone chokes under pressure.
I got a question for you, though. Really important.
Go ahead.
If a fight happens on UFC Fight Pass, does it actually happen?
Like a tree falling in the forest.
No one has ever seen a fight on UFC Fight Pass.
I would, that if people talk about pay-per-view numbers, that's the number I'm curious about. I'm wondering how many people have UFC. Because there's enough stuff. There's enough fights that are free. I just don't see the need to, to pay. And I've got my Netflix, my Hulu. I've got all these things. I don't feel like I need to pay another $10 a month to watch something that I can watch anytime I want. Basically, we got YouTube. We got 1,000 other ways we can watch fights. And then after the fight is over, it's pretty easy to watch the fight on YouTube or one of the other streaming services. So, that's my thought. How about you?
I don't know anyone who buys a subscription to UFC Fight Pass. So I don't know if this fight is actually going to happen because no one's going to see it.
Well, Donald Cerrone, real fast, prediction, I've got Donald Cerrone. I'm going with Donald Cerrone. He's a little bit of a slow starter, so I'm going with Donald Cerrone KO 2. Oh, and I'm going to go with by submission.
You know what? We're on the same page, Jay. I got Cerrone in round 2 by submission as well. I was watching Darren Till fight. You know, and he's a stand-up fighter, but his game